I found a little girl's raincoat in my hallway closet, and when I checked the pocket, I realized my husband hadn't just lied to me, he'd built another life nearby secretly. It was bright yellow. That's the first thing I remember. Not my husband's face, not the words he said later, not even the moment everything finally broke open. Just that little yellow raincoat hanging behind my winter scarf, like it had every right to be there. I stood in the hallway closet with one hand on a stack of old board games, and the other holding that tiny coat by the plastic hanger, staring at it like my brain had stopped working. For a second, I actually thought maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe I had forgotten something obvious. Maybe my sister had brought one of her grandkids over and left it behind. Except my sister lived 3 states away, and no child had been inside my house in almost a year. I remember touching the sleeve. It was soft, light, still clean, not old, not forgotten for months. It smelled faintly like strawberry shampoo and that sweet, powdery smell little kids seem to carry with them. There was a tiny smudge of dirt near one cuff, like someone had worn it to school or the park and then taken it off carefully. I don't know what made me check the pocket. Maybe because I needed a normal explanation so badly that I was willing to look for one. Inside was a folded permission slip from Brookside Elementary. I unfolded it right there under the hallway light. Field trip to the State Science Museum. Student name, Ava Harper. Emergency contact, Daniel Harper. Relationship to student, father. My husband's name is Daniel Harper. So is mine. For a few seconds, I just stood there breathing through my mouth, reading the paper over and over like the words might change if I looked long enough. I could hear the dryer running in the laundry room. I could hear our refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Outside, a car drove past the house. Everything sounded completely normal, and that was the most disturbing part. Because my whole life had just tilted, and the world hadn't noticed. I was 47 years old, married for 19 years, and I had just found proof that there was a child connected to my husband that I knew nothing about. Not a niece, not a friend's daughter, not a godchild, not some harmless misunderstanding. Ava Harper, father Daniel Harper. I wish I could tell you I handled it well. I wish I could say I took a breath, sat down, and thought clearly. I didn't. I put the coat back exactly where I found it. I folded the permission slip with shaking hands and slid it into my jeans pocket. Then I walked into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at the fruit bowl for I don't know how long. There were bananas in it that needed to be thrown out. One of them had gone soft and brown on one side. I remember that because my eyes kept landing on it, my mind refused to fully step into what I had found, so it grabbed onto stupid details instead. Banana, salt shaker, the tiny chip on the rim of the cereal bowl drying by the sink. Anything but the truth. Daniel and I had what most people would call a quiet life. We lived in a blue 2-story house on a calm street outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy, a decent neighborhood, mature trees, sidewalks, people who waved when they got the mail. We had a back deck, a golden retriever named Murphy, and a marriage that looked solid from the outside. For a long time, I believed it was solid from the inside too. We met when I was 26 and he was 29. He had kind eyes and a steady voice, and this way of making everything feel less dramatic than it was. I loved that about him. I was the emotional one, the talker, the one who stayed up replaying awkward conversations from 2 years earlier. Daniel was the kind of man who tightened loose cabinet hinges on Saturday mornings and remembered to rotate the tires before winter. He made life feel safe. At least, that's what I told myself for years. We wanted kids. That part matters, maybe more than anything else. We tried for a long time, too long, the kind of long that changes the shape of a marriage even when nobody says it out loud. Doctor visits, blood work, 2 miscarriages, 1 failed IVF cycle that took our savings and some part of my hope with it. By the time I was 40, I was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Daniel stopped bringing it up. I stopped pretending every month didn't hurt. Eventually, we became one of those couples who said things like, "We have a good life anyway, and it just wasn't meant to be." And I think in some ways, we really believed that. We built routines around the empty spaces. Friday takeout, Sunday coffee on the deck, road trips in the fall, murky compromises, quiet grief packed away so neatly it almost looked healed. That's why the coat felt like a bomb in the closet, because it wasn't just evidence of a lie. It touched the one wound in our marriage we had both learned to walk around with practiced care. Daniel had been acting strange for a while, not cartoonishly strange, nothing obvious enough to make me accuse him of anything, just little things that didn't fit. He had started working later 3 or 4 nights a week. He said the company was restructuring and everything was a mess. He became weirdly protective of his phone, not in some dramatic way, just subtle. If it buzzed, he flipped it over. He took calls in the garage. He started using cash more often. There were little gaps in his explanations that I noticed and then dismissed because life is busy and marriage teaches you to ignore small discomforts if you don't want to live in constant suspicion. A month before I found the coat, I had opened the trash can to throw away a paper towel and saw an empty applesauce pouch on on top. One of those squeeze pouches for little kids. I had actually laughed to myself and thought maybe Daniel had grabbed it at the grocery store because he was hungry and in a rush. He ate weird things sometimes. Once, I saw him eat cold baked beans straight from the can. But now, sitting at the kitchen table with that permission slip burning a hole in my pocket, I remembered the applesauce pouch, then the fruit snacks, then the little plastic spoon in the sink that wasn't from our silverware set, then the cartoon thumbnail that had popped up on the TV under continue watching one Saturday morning when Daniel had been home alone and I'd gone to get my nails done. At the time, I'd frowned at it and asked, "What is this?" He shrugged and said Murphy must have stepped on the remote while he was out mowing. I actually accepted that. I wanted to believe my life. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in 19 years of marriage. I searched my own house like I was trespassing in it. I started small: the mudroom bench, the guest room closet, the garage cabinets. At first, I kept expecting to feel foolish, like I was 1 minute away from finding some reasonable explanation that would make me ashamed of myself. Instead, I found a pink toothbrush behind the box of travel toiletries in the bathroom cabinet, then a pack of children's bandages in the kitchen junk drawer, the kind with cartoon dinosaurs on them. Then, in the guest room dresser, tucked underneath an old set of flannel sheets, I found 2 pairs of tiny leggings, a pair of socks with yellow grips on the bottom, and a stuffed rabbit with one ear bent down. I sat on the guest room floor holding that rabbit, and something inside me went cold. Not hot, not angry, cold. Because by then, I knew this was not one accidental item. This was a pattern, a system, a hidden life that had been moving inside my house, just outside my line of sight. I opened the top dresser drawer and found a coloring book with 3 pages filled in. On the inside cover, in careful childish letters, was written AVIH. Underneath it, in bigger handwriting I recognized immediately, was Daniel S. "You forgot this at Daddy's house, Peanut." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. Daddy's house, not Daddy's office, not Uncle Daniel's place, not a family friend. Daddy's house. I went into the bathroom and got sick. When I looked up, my face in the mirror didn't even look like mine. I was pale and gray around the mouth. My eyes looked older. There's a specific kind of pain that doesn't arrive like a scream. It arrives like silence, like all the sound being vacuumed out of a room. That's what I felt. I wanted to call someone, my sister, my best friend Nora, anybody. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because saying it out loud would make it real. And I still had this desperate animal part of me hoping there was a twist, a context, some explanation that would hurt less than the one my mind had already built. So instead, I cleaned the kitchen. I know that sounds insane, but people do strange things when their life splits in half. I wiped the counters. I emptied the dishwasher. I folded the throw blanket on the couch. I fed Murphy early. My body needed a task, something simple and physical, while my brain spun. Daniel texted me around 5:30. "Running late. Don't wait for dinner." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "No problem." I hated how normal that looked. 2 little words from a wife who still had no idea who she was married to. He got home a little after 8. I heard the garage door, the familiar heavy step, the jingle of his keys in the bowl by the entryway. I was in the living room with the lamp on and the TV muted. Murphy padded over, tail wagging. Daniel bent to pet him, loosened his tie, and smiled at me like it was any other Thursday. That smile almost broke me more than the lie. "Hey," he said, "you eat." I nodded. "Long day." "Kind of." He walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. "There's leftover chicken, right?" I watched him move around our kitchen. This man I had loved for almost 2 decades. And I wondered how many times he had walked in carrying pieces of another life with him. How many times he had kissed me hello after leaving a child somewhere. How many stories he had told me while keeping a whole person hidden. I should have confronted him right then. Maybe a stronger woman would have. But I didn't want a denial. I didn't want a half-truth. I didn't want him shaping the story before I understood how big it was. So I said nothing. That night, I lay beside him in bed listening to him breathe. I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the dark and thought about the words on the coloring book. Daddy's house. Around 2 in the morning, he rolled toward me in his sleep and put one arm across my waist. I froze. That touch, which had comforted me through panic attacks, funerals, flu seasons, and bad years, suddenly felt wrong. Not because it hurt, because it didn't belong to the man I thought he was anymore. The next morning, after he left for work, I called in sick. Then I did the one thing I had never imagined doing. I logged into our phone account. I wasn't especially tech-savvy, but I knew enough to find the usage records. There was one number repeated over and over, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day, mostly during his lunch hour and just before 6 in the evening. I copied it down, then searched it online. Nothing. I typed it into Cash App. A name came up. Aaron Cole. My chest tightened. I didn't know any Aaron Cole. Then I checked our joint bank account. Daniel handled most of the bills, not because he controlled the money, but because he was better with details and I was happy to let him. I could see the regular transactions, mortgage, utilities, insurance. Nothing jumped out at first. Then I noticed transfers, small enough to hide inside normal life. $400 here, $300 there, always on different dates. dates, always to the same account ending in numbers I didn't recognize. I went back 6 months, then a year, then farther. It was never the same amount, but it was consistent. There was also a recurring payment for a storage unit on the other side of town. I wrote everything down in a notebook with the date at the top, like I was building a case against my own marriage. By noon, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. At 1:30, I drove to Brookside Elementary. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. Walk inside and ask for a child. Announce myself as the secret wife. Maybe I just needed to see if it was real beyond the paper in my pocket. Maybe I needed to stand in the parking lot and look at the building where this hidden truth had been moving around without me. I parked across the street and waited. School let out at 3. The crossing guard came out first, then teachers, then kids poured through the doors in jackets and backpacks and bright little voices. It was chaos, but the kind of ordinary chaos that made me feel like I was underwater. Then I saw him. Daniel. He walked out from the side entrance like he had done it 100 times. Comfortable, familiar. He wasn't in work clothes. He'd changed into jeans and a navy quarter-zip sweater I'd bought him last Christmas. He stood near the curb, scanning the crowd with a look I had seen before at airports and restaurants when he was waiting for me. Then a little girl ran toward him. She had dark hair in 2 loose braids and that same yellow raincoat. She hit him at the waist with the full force of a child who knows she'll be caught. He bent down laughing, pulled her into his arms, and kissed the top of her head. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers cramped. There are moments when pain becomes physical so fast it almost feels like impact. That was one of them. I felt it in my ribs, in my throat, in my teeth. Because he didn't look guilty. He looked like a father. Like this mattered to him. Like this was normal. Like he had been living in a truth I was never invited into. The little girl said something I couldn't hear. He smiled and adjusted her backpack, then took her hand and walked her toward his truck. Toward my truck, parked 3 rows away. I ducked down instinctively, heart slamming, and watched them get in. My husband leaned over to buckle her seatbelt. That tenderness ruined me. Not because she had done anything wrong. She hadn't. She was a child. But because I had begged that man to build a life with me, and there he was, doing something beautiful and ordinary for someone he had hidden from me for God knows how long. I cried so hard I couldn't follow them right away. I had to wait until my vision cleared. When I finally pulled out, his truck was already halfway down the road. I kept enough distance not to be obvious. He didn't drive to our house. He drove to a small rental complex 15 minutes away, one of those aging brick apartment places with narrow balconies and uneven parking lines. He parked near building C. Ava climbed out, and he carried her backpack while she skipped ahead. A woman opened the apartment door before they even reached it. She was maybe in her late 30s. Thin, tired-looking, blonde hair pulled into a rough ponytail. She kissed Ava's forehead, then looked at Daniel in a way that made my blood run hot. Not flirtatious. Familiar. Worn in. Like history. He went inside with them, and stayed there. I sat in my car, across the lot, for 42 minutes. I know because I watched the dashboard clock, like it was attached to a detonator. When he finally came out, he stood for a second on the walkway talking to the woman. She folded her arms. He rubbed the back of his neck. It looked tense. Then Ava appeared in the doorway holding that stuffed rabbit I'd found in my guest room, and she waved. Daniel waved back, got in the truck, and drove off. I sat there after he left, staring at Building C, apartment 12, feeling like I had fallen through the floor of my own life. That night, I didn't say a word when he came home. I watched him eat spaghetti across from me. I listened to him complain about a budget meeting. I watched him ask if Murphy had gotten his pill, and something in me hardened in a way I didn't recognize. This wasn't one lie. This was thousands of lies, stitched together, so tightly they had become his normal. 3 more days passed before I confronted him, not because I was weak, because I needed to know everything I could before he started talking. I went to the storage unit Saturday morning while he was out grabbing mulch for the flower beds. The keypad code was our anniversary. That should tell you everything. Inside were plastic bins, a twin mattress leaning against the wall, a small white bookshelf, a child's bicycle with training wheels removed, and 2 framed photographs turned backward. I lifted the first one. Daniel, younger by maybe 8 or 9 years, holding a baby in a hospital room. The second was worse. Daniel sitting on a park bench with the same woman from the apartment, Ava between them at maybe age 4, all 3 smiling at the camera like a family. I sat down right there on the concrete floor because my legs gave out. There were documents too, a folder labeled medical, another labeled school, a stack of birthday cards tied with a blue ribbon. I opened one. To Ava, age 6. I'm sorry I can't stay tonight. I'll make it up to you Saturday. Love, Dad. Another. To Ava, age 8. I know this year has been confusing, but none of this is your fault. I love you more than I've ever said out loud. My hands started to go numb. There was a child. She was at least 8, maybe 9. This wasn't wasn't recent. This wasn't some sudden emergency. This had been unfolding for nearly a decade while I slept next to him, planned holidays with him, buried my mother with him, sat through fertility appointments with him. I found one more thing in that storage unit that changed the story from terrible to almost unbearable. An old envelope with my husband's handwriting and a date from 11 years earlier. Inside was a folded letter from the woman, Erin. Daniel, I can't do this by myself anymore. You said you needed time, but I'm already pregnant, and your wife deserves the truth even if you're too scared to give it to her. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to act like this child exists. 11 years earlier. I did the math in my head. 11 years ago was when I was going through my second miscarriage. That spring is burned into my memory. The blood, the hospital smell, the look on Daniel's face when the doctor stopped using hopeful words. I remembered coming home empty and hollow, and barely able to stand in the shower because grief had weight then, actual weight. And sometime around that same season, while I was losing our baby, my husband had got another woman pregnant. I don't think I have words for the sound that came out of me in that storage unit. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a scream, it was something lower, something older. By the time I drove home, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was clear. When Daniel got back with bags of mulch in the truck bed, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the permission slip, the letter, and the hospital photo laid out in front of me. He walked in, saw my face, then saw the papers, and stopped. There are moments when a person's whole body answers before their mouth does. His did. His shoulders dropped. His skin changed color. He didn't ask what this was. He knew. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then I asked the question that had been tearing through me for 3 days. How long? He closed the door quietly behind him. Claire. How long? I said again. His eyes went to the letter, then the photo, then the permission slip. 9 years, he said, barely above a whisper. I laughed. It came out ugly and broken. 9 years. He pulled out the chair acro SS from me but didn't sit. I was going to tell you. No, you were. I tried more than once. You had 9 years. He pressed his hand to his mouth. I had never seen him look small before. He always had an answer, a plan, some practical step. That day, he looked like a man standing in the ruins of something he knew he had set on fire. It started with Erin from work, he said. It was during a bad time. We were barely talking. You were shutting down and I... Stop. He stopped. I leaned forward. Do not stand in my kitchen and tell me you cheated on me because I was grieving our dead baby the wrong way. His face crumpled then, truly crumpled. That's not what I meant. But it is what you said. He sat down slowly. It was a few months. It ended. Then she told me she was pregnant. I didn't believe her at first. Then I did. By then I had already chosen us. I didn't know how to destroy you with that. Destroy me. Like honesty would have been the destruction, not what he actually did. So instead, I said quietly, you lied to me for 9 years. He looked down. Yes. There's something almost insulting about how clean the truth can sound once it finally arrives. Yes. That's simple. I asked him if Ava was really his. He said yes. DNA confirmed it years ago. I asked how often he saw her. At first not much. Erin moved away for a while then came back. They had an arrangement. Money, visits, holidays moved around like a secret custody calendar inside my marriage. In the last year, Erin had started struggling. Pills at first, then worse. Daniel had stepped in more, picking Ava up from school, bringing her to our house when Erin disappeared or slept through afternoons. Our house, I repeated. He nodded once, like he knew how monstrous that sounded. I asked if Ava knew about me. No, he said. She just knew I couldn't always stay. I stared at him. And what am I asked. The reason you couldn't stay, the obstacle, the wife in the way of your real life. No, he said quickly. Never that. But what else was I supposed to call it? A child's toothbrush in my bathroom, a rabbit in my guest room, a coat in my closet. He had built a secret life not in some distant city, not online, not hidden safely behind business trips. He had brought it into my home, into the rooms I dusted, the sheets I washed, the walls I painted. That betrayal had a texture to it. It felt intimate in the cruelest possible way. Then he said the sentence I still think about sometimes. I loved you both. Maybe he meant it to sound sincere. Maybe it was sincere. But hearing it felt like being erased. Because love without truth is just a performance that benefits the liar. I asked him if he loved Erin. He said no, not then, not now. That whatever had happened between them was over years ago. That Ava was the only reason he was still connected to her. That Erin had spiraled, and he had been trying to keep the little girl stable. That he was going to tell me once he figured out how to make it make sense. I remember feeling this strange, exhausted rage at that, as if there were some version of this that could ever make sense. Did you ever look at me, I asked, when I was crying after the IVF failed, and think maybe I deserved to know you already had a daughter? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence told me yes. That was the moment I stood up and realized my marriage was over. Not because he had fathered a child, not even only because he cheated, though that would have been enough. It was the day daily cruelty of letting me grieve in the dark while he carried the thing I wanted most into another life. It was letting me believe we had suffered the same loss when he had secretly become a father anyway. It was the years of watching me make peace with emptiness while he rationed out pieces of himself elsewhere. I told him to leave. He cried, actually cried. I had seen Daniel cry maybe twice in 19 years. Once when his father died, once when Murphy got hit by a car as a puppy and we thought he wouldn't make it. Now he cried at my kitchen table and said he was sorry and that he never meant for it to become this and that he had loved me the whole time. I believed he was sorry. That didn't save him. He packed a bag. Murphy followed him through the house, confused. I stood in the hallway and watched the man I built a life with carry a duffel bag to his truck while the late afternoon sun hit the driveway exactly the way it always had. Before he got in, he turned back and said, "I know I don't deserve this, but when you can, please don't hate Ava." That was the one thing he got right. Because I didn't hate her. I couldn't. If anything, thinking about her made everything sadder. A child had grown up in the shadows of my marriage. A child had been taught that love meant fragments, different homes, partial truths. A father who showed up with tenderness and left with secrecy. None of that belonged to her. After he left, I called Nora. The second she heard my voice, she said, "What happened?" And I broke. Not neatly, not with composure. I sat on my own kitchen floor and told my best friend that my husband had a 9-year-old daughter I never knew about. And every time I said it out loud, it sounded impossible all over again. Nora came over with 2 grocery bags full of things I did not ask for but ended up needing anyway. Soup, crackers, tissues, a bottle of wine neither of us opened. She stayed until midnight, mostly sitting beside me in silence. Real friends know when words are useless. The days after that moved strangely. Daniel stayed in a hotel at first, then in the apartment complex near Aaron and Ava. He texted, called, sent long apologies I couldn't read all the way through. I spoke to a lawyer, then another one. I changed passwords. I opened a bank account in my name only. I told my sister. I told exactly 3 people at work and said I needed time before the gossip machine got hold of it. Murphy waited by the door every evening for 2 weeks. That part hurt more than I expected. The house felt haunted, not because of ghosts, but because ordinary objects had become evidence. The guest room door, the junk drawer, the hallway closet, even the TV remote. I kept noticing little things and wondering if they had belonged to Ava's hidden visits. A broken crayon under the couch, a child-sized fingerprint on the glass of the back door, a cup in the sink with a cartoon octopus on it that I had once assumed came from some work event. I wasn't living in my home anymore. I was living in a crime scene made of domestic details. About a month later, Daniel asked if we could meet in person. I almost said no. Then I said yes, because I had questions I still needed answered, and I didn't want those questions following me for the rest of my life. We met at a coffee shop halfway between the house and his office. Public, quiet, safe. He looked older already, grayer, like guilt had an actual weight after all. He told me Aaron had entered rehab after an overdose scare. He was trying to get temporary guardianship of Ava until she was stable. He said he knew how it looked, but he was trying to do the right thing now. I almost laughed at the now. Then he told me something I wasn't prepared for. Ava knows about you, he said. I felt my whole body tense. She found a picture of us in the truck. She asked who you were. I told her the truth, not all of it, but enough. Why would you do that now? Because I'm done lying. There was a bitterness in me at hearing that sentence after 19 years of marriage. I asked what enough meant. He said he told her I had been his wife for a long time and that I didn't know about her and that I was hurt because he had made very bad choices. I stared at my coffee. Then he said, she wrote you something, but I didn't know if giving it to you would be unfair. A letter from the child who had been the shape of my betrayal. I don't know why I said yes. Maybe because I needed to see what innocence looked like when it had been dragged into adult wreckage. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a folded sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting was large and uneven. Miss Claire, I'm sorry my coat was at your house. I didn't know it was bad. My dad said you are sad because he lied, and that is his fault. I don't want you to be sad because of me. I like your blue flowers in the kitchen. They are pretty. From Ava. I read it twice. Then I folded it back up carefully and slid it into my purse. That little note destroyed whatever clean version of anger I had been trying to hold onto. Because betrayal always wants a villain you can point at, and life keeps refusing to be that simple. Daniel had done something unforgivable. Aaron had participated in a lie that swallowed years of my life. But Ava was just a little girl who noticed the flowers in my kitchen. After that meeting, I sat in my car for a long time and cried harder than I had on the day I found the coat. Not because I wanted my marriage back. I didn't. But because grief had become more complicated than rage. And complicated grief is the hardest kind to carry. I mourned my marriage. I mourned the version of Daniel I had loved. I mourned the years I would now revisit with new eyes, seeing cracks where I once saw trust. And in some strange way, I mourned the family I never had and the hidden one that had existed just out of reach. The divorce moved forward. Daniel didn't fight me on anything. Maybe guilt made him generous. Maybe he knew there was nothing he could say that would make him deserve grace. I kept the house for for a while, then sold it the following spring. I couldn't stay. Every room held too many layered versions of truth. I downsized to a townhouse with big windows and no hallway closet deep enough to swallow secrets. People like to imagine betrayal ends with one dramatic C, confrontation, and then a clean exit into a better life. It doesn't. It lingers. It gets into your nervous system. It makes you suspicious of silence. It makes you read tone into ordinary texts. It makes you pause before relaxing into happiness because some part of you now believes peace might be the same thing as not noticing in time. For months, I woke up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing. I would lie there replaying memories, looking for clues I had missed. The late work meetings, the extra cash, the Saturdays he volunteered to grocery shop alone, the children's music ID once heard faintly when I pulled into the driveway and assumed was coming from a neighbor's car. I became obsessed with the idea that I should have known. My therapist was the one who finally said, "Claire, not knowing is not the same thing as failing." That sentence changed something in me because I had been treating my trust like stupidity, like if I had just been smarter, sharper, less loving, less willing to believe, I could have saved myself. But trust is not stupidity. Trust is the thing betrayal steals and then tries to frame as your weakness. Over time, the sharpest parts softened. Not quickly, not beautifully, just honestly. I stopped checking Daniel's social media through fake accounts I pretended not to have. I stopped asking mutual friends for updates. I stopped building imaginary conversations where he finally understood what he had taken from me. Real healing began when I accepted something ugly and simple. Sometimes the person who hurt you understands it perfectly and still did it anyway. About a year later, I ran into Daniel once at a pharmacy. I was in the cold medicine aisle, and he was holding a box of children's fever reducer. For 1 second, we just looked at each other. He looked tired, not tragic, not redeemed, just tired. "Hi, Claire," he said softly. "Hi." He glanced at the box in his hand. "Ava's sick, ear infection." I nodded. That could have been the whole conversation. Maybe it should have been. But then he said, "She still talks about your flowers." I felt a strange ache in my chest. I had moved into a place with a small kitchen window full of potted herbs and cheap grocery store bouquets. Whenever I remembered to buy them, "Tell her I said thank you for the note," I said. He nodded. His eyes filled a little, but I didn't stay to watch what he did with that emotion. It no longer belonged to me. I walked away with cough drops and paper towels, and the quiet understanding that some wounds never become beautiful. They just become survivable. If you asked me now what hurt the most, I don't think I'd say the affair. I think I'd say the intimacy of the deception. The way he let me keep house inside a lie. The way he let me wash sheets and plan dinners and light candles in rooms where another truth had already been living. The way he looked me in the face and accepted my trust every single day like he had earned it. That was the deepest cut. Not one mistake. A system. A life built in the space between what I saw and what he chose to hide. And yet, as strange as it sounds, that yellow raincoat also saved me because it ended the slow death of a life that wasn't real. It forced the truth into daylight. It gave shape to what my gut had been feeling before my mind could prove it. It reminded me that denial can feel peaceful right up until the moment it ruins you. I still think about that day sometimes. The hallway light, the coat hanger, my hand in the pocket, the permission slip unfolding like a sentence already passed. There was a version of me before that moment who believed love meant safety if you gave enough of yourself to it. There is a version of me now who knows better. Love is not proven by history, not by shared mortgage payments, not by how long someone stayed, not even by how sincerely they cry when they're caught. Love, if it is real, can survive truth. What Daniel gave me could not. So if there's any lesson in what happened, it's this. Pay attention to the quiet wrong thing, the small object that makes no sense, the explanation that lands a little off, the discomfort you keep smoothing over because you're afraid of what it might mean. Sometimes your life doesn't fall apart all at once. Sometimes it hangs in your hallway closet, bright yellow and tiny, waiting for you to finally reach into the pocket.
The school bell, even though it was 2 in the morning and snow was coming down so hard the yard looked like it had been erased. She told me about finding him at the back fence, shivering, one hand lifted as if he were waiting for someone to let him cross. He looked at her and said very politely, "My wife's on her way. She'll be upset if I miss her." Anna had stood there in her coat over pajamas, slippers sinking into snow, and said, "Dad, let's get you inside." And he had answered, "I can't. Ruth won't know where to find me." That was the kind of thing she had been living with, not just paperwork, not meals and medications and schedules, that kind of ache, the kind that does not bleed where anyone can see it. She told me about the morning he forgot how to button his shirt and got so angry at his own hands that he threw the shirt across the room, and then sat on the bed crying because he thought he was becoming a burden. She told me about the first time he called her Ruth by mistake and smiled at her with this tired, relieved expression, and how she didn't correct him for a full minute because she wanted just once to see what it looked like when his face softened that way. She told me about the stove burners, the missed pills, the afternoon he put frozen chicken in the pantry and a loaf of bread in the dishwasher. She told me about how he began to hide his mistakes because he knew something was happening, and that made it worse. The human mind can survive a great deal, but there is a particular horror in watching your own edges blur while you're still aware enough to fear it. Then she told me things that had nothing to do with illness and everything to do with the rest of us. She told me Lily had started sleeping with the hallway light on because she was scared Grandpa would open her door at night and ask where the school bus was. She told me Paul had taken conference calls from the garage because Daniel got agitated by voices he couldn't place. She told me there were afternoons when she sat in my kitchen after getting him down for a nap and hated the sound of the refrigerator because it was the only thing in the room that didn't need anything from her. She told me that one evening, after Daniel had a bad spell and accused her of stealing his wallet, she went out to the driveway and screamed into her own sleeve so the neighbors wouldn't hear. I sat beside her and listened. I did not defend myself. There are moments in a life when the only honorable thing to do is stay still and let the truth come all the way in. Then she said the thing that finally split open what was left of my pride. I stopped feeling like your daughter, she said. I felt like the woman who was left holding your place. The porch went very quiet. The leaves in the maple at the corner of the yard barely moved. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and stopped. I could smell fresh-cut grass from a neighbor's lawn. Every ordinary thing seemed sharper when set beside that sentence. I said, after a long time, I think you were. She turned toward me slowly, like she had not expected agreement to hurt as much as resistance. I kept looking at the yard because I couldn't yet look at her. That doesn't make everything fair, I said, and it doesn't make what you did right, but I think you were. She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. For a few seconds she didn't speak. Then she whispered, I didn't know if you'd ever say that. Neither did I. That was the first real turn between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a clearing. Over the next week I began building a life around Daniel's facility the way Anna had built one around his illness. I went every morning after breakfast. Some days I brought old photographs, some days music. Sometimes I brought nothing but my own body and the willingness to sit beside a man who no longer knew how to place me and who was still, unmistakably, my husband. The first lesson of memory care is that your love has to loosen its demands. If you walk into those halls insisting on being recognized exactly as you were, you will spend every visit grieving what is absent. But if you let yourself attend to what remains, the warmth of a hand, the lift of an eyebrow at a familiar song, the way someone leans toward comfort even when the words are gone, you start to understand that identity is not only recall. It is also rhythm, preference, feeling, habit. The body remembers what the mind misplaces. Daniel liked the courtyard in late afternoon. He sat with his face angled towards sunlight as though he could still measure time by warmth alone. He liked Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and old church hymns sung too softly to be performance. He still straightened napkins that weren't crooked. He still thanked nurses by name. He still disliked peas with a consistency so fierce it felt like character outliving cognition. And sometimes, not often, but enough to bruise me, he watched me with a kind of searching tenderness that made me think some buried part of him was standing just behind the door. One morning I brought the old photo album from our first years of marriage. Cheap plastic sleeves, bad lighting. Me in a yellow dress in 1984, looking so young I wanted to reach into the page and tell her a few things. Daniel in cutoff jeans staining a deck we built with money we did not have and confidence we did not deserve. Anna at 5 with popsicle-stained lips. Christmas mornings. Campgrounds. Two exhausted adults leaning against each other in folding chairs, smiling like survival was a private joke. I turned the pages slowly. This one, I said, tapping a picture of him in front of the grill. You burned every hot dog because you were trying to teach Anna the capitals of all 50 states. He looked at the photo, then at me. That sounds like a terrible meal. It was. He smiled, a real one this time, almost boyish. Did she learn them? Only because you bribed her with watermelon. He stared at the picture again and I saw it happen. Not recognition in the full clean way I wanted, just a flicker, a current. His fingers touched the edge of the plastic. I know this house, he said quietly. My breath caught, yes. I know that tree. The maple out front. He nodded, I used to. He stopped, his brow tightened. I used to wait there for, he looked at me helplessly. I should have said my name, I should have filled the silence for him. But I had started to understand that memory is sometimes like an animal in the woods. If you rush at it, it bolts. So I just said, it's all right. He rested his hand over mine. You're kind, he said. I smiled because there was nothing else to do. So are you. When I got back to the house that day, I walked into my bedroom, my old bedroom, still Lily's for now, and stood in the center of it looking at the pink blanket folded at the foot of the bed, the stack of library books on the nightstand, the little row of plastic horses on the windowsill. A child had settled here in my absence. She had dreamed here, gotten sick here, lost baby teeth here probably, had thunderstorms explained to her here. And that was the second hidden truth I had to absorb. Life had not only changed, it had needed to. Not every alteration was a betrayal. Some were simply the shape love takes under pressure. Still, pressure reveals fractures. The financial papers kept bothering me, not because money mattered more than anything else, but because money tells the truth about panic. People spend around their real fears. They sign things they would never sign on a calm Tuesday. They hand over rights because the alternative looks like catastrophe. So I met with the attorney myself. His office smelled like paper and stale coffee, and the kind of air conditioning old buildings never get right. He was a careful man in his 70s with silver glasses and the defensive politeness of someone who knows he may have done his job correctly and still be hated for it. He laid everything out again: the trust, the spend-down planning, the transfers designed to preserve some stability while paying for long-term care, the way my absence had complicated consent, the way Daniel's capacity had been assessed at each stage, the limits, the risks, the choices available to a family trying not to lose both the husband and the house at once. Nothing he said was legally shocking. Emotionally, it was another matter. Did my husband understand what he was signing? I asked. At the beginning, yes, he said carefully. Later, we moved more cautiously. And did my daughter? He hesitated. Your daughter understood enough to keep asking the right questions. That stung in a way he probably did not intend. When I left his office, I sat in my car with the engine off and looked at my hands on the steering wheel. Veins raised, skin thinner than it used to be, small scar along the knuckle of my right thumb from a field hospital tent in 1998. These were capable hands, useful hands, strong hands. They had steadied IV lines in low light and packed duffel bags in 12 minutes and written condolence letters with a discipline I once mistook for grace. But there are kinds of labor these hands had not done enough of: holding the daily weight, carrying the middle, staying. I drove to the facility instead of home. Daniel was asleep when I arrived, head tilted awkwardly in the chair by his window. A book lay open on his lap, though I doubted he'd been reading. Marisol came in, adjusted the blanket over his knees, and asked softly if I needed anything. I surprised myself by answering honestly. Yes, I said, I need someone to tell me if I'm too late. She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled the second chair near mine and sat down. I can't answer that the way you want, she said, but I can tell you this: people think memory care is only about remembering names and dates. It is. People know when someone feels like home, even if they can't explain why. Some days he may not know who you are, but his body knows your voice calms him. He waits less by the door when you've been here. He eats better on the afternoons you visit. That matters. I stared at Daniel's sleeping face. His mouth had softened in sleep the way it always used to. That same gentle downturn at the corners. That same slight crease between his brows. I left, I said. Marisol nodded once, not agreeing, just letting the fact exist. I left a lot. Another nod. And he got sick while I was gone. Yes. I laughed a little under my breath. You're good at this. At what? Not rescuing people from the truth. She smiled faintly. It usually doesn't help. Then she stood, squeezed my shoulder once, and went back to work. A week later came the next blow. I had started settling into Daniel's routine enough to notice changes. His appetite slipped first, then his attention. He became harder to engage, more prone to drifting halfway through a sentence and not finding his way back. One afternoon, he looked at the spoon in his pudding cup for nearly a minute as if it belonged to a machine he had once been trained on and no longer trusted. Marisol asked if we could talk in private. There are sentences that rearrange the blood in your body before the content even reaches you. Can we talk in private is one of them. We sat in a small consultation room, painted a color meant to look restful and succeeding only in looking resigned. He's declining more quickly now, she said. Not all at once, but enough that I think it's time we discuss next steps. Next steps is one of those medical phrases built to spare everyone and sparing no one. I knew what it meant before she continued. They recommended a hospice evaluation, comfort-focused care, less pushing, more easing, fewer interventions aimed at prolonging and more at reducing distress. I listened. I asked intelligent questions because I know how to ask intelligent questions. What criteria? What timeline? What markers were they seeing? Was he in pain? Was he frightened? Was there anything reversible? What should we prepare for? What would appetite changes mean? Sleep, speech, mobility. She answered all of it with the calm specificity of a woman who understood that facts can be a handrail. Then she said very gently, this part can be fast or slow, but it is still this part. I drove home with both hands at 10 and 2 like a teenager taking her first lesson, because I did not trust myself with any other posture. Anna was at the table doing Lily's math homework when I came in. One look at me and she sent Lily upstairs to wash up for dinner. Paul followed without being asked. I sat down across from my daughter in the same kitchen where I had once left her notes on permission slips and dental appointments and tried to make it count as mothering. They want hospice, I said. She closed her eyes just for a second, then opened them again. Okay. You already knew this might be coming. She looked down. The nurse mentioned it last week. I waited. I didn't know how to tell you, she whispered. There it was again, the pattern between us. News arriving in softened forms, delay pretending to be kindness. Something in me should have snapped. Instead, what came was tired and clear. You don't get to hold the information anymore, I said. I know you had to, I know why you did, but not anymore. Tears rose in her eyes immediately. Okay. I mean it. I know. No filtering, no waiting for the right time, no deciding what I can handle. She nodded, okay. I took a breath, and in return, I will not disappear into shock and leave you carrying the actual work. That was our new contract, spoken plainly over a math worksheet covered in eraser dust. Hospice did not arrive like a dramatic scene. It came as forms, a different nurse, new language, extra supplies, a quiet shift in priorities, comfort, dignity, presence. The words sounded almost simple until you tried to live inside them. Daniel began sleeping more. On his awake afternoons, I read to him, not always books, sometimes the letters he had written and never sent. I don't know whether that was for him or for me, probably both. I would sit in the chair by his bed and unfold those pages carefully, the paper worn at the creases now from my own handling. Coffee tastes like coffee, I read one day, and he smiled without opening his eyes. Another afternoon I read, Tell her I'm still here. His fingers twitched on the blanket. I started bringing small things from home. The blue ceramic bowl he loved, though he no longer remembered calling it the good ugly bowl. The old red flannel shirt that still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. A record sleeve from the Ella Fitzgerald album we used to play on Sundays when we cleaned the house. Not the record player itself, just the sleeve, sewn. At times, objects carry a shape memory of a life, even when they have become useless for their original purpose. At home, the atmosphere changed too, not magically, but noticeably. Anna and I were gentler with each other after that porch conversation, not because the wound had closed, because we had stopped pretending it wasn't there. One night after Lily was asleep, Anna and I stood at the sink washing dishes side by side. Warm water, soap bubbles sliding toward the drain, the yellow kitchen light flattening everything into an ordinary domestic scene. She handed me a plate and said, without looking at me, "Do you remember my 8th grade awards night?" I dried the plate slowly. No. She nodded once as if confirming a piece of evidence. I got a writing award. Dad recorded it on that huge camcorder. You mailed flowers to the school the next day. I closed my eyes. I kept the card, she said, for a long time. I'm sorry. She shrugged, but the movement was brittle. I know. No, I said, turning toward her. I know you know, but I want to say it exactly. I am sorry I was not in the room. I am sorry I let good intentions stand in for presence. I am sorry I made you learn how to understand me before I learned how to stay. She put the dish towel down and leaned both hands on the counter. Her shoulders shook once, then again. I used to rehearse being angry at you, she said. On my way home, in the shower, folding laundry, I think of what I would finally say. And then you come back with your suitcase and your tired face and your little gifts from airport shops, and I'd just be so relieved you were in the house that I'd lose my nerve. I laughed softly through my own tears. That sounds like us. She gave a watery half-smile. Yeah. Then she said the thing I had not dared hope to hear. I never doubted that you loved us. I doubted whether love was enough to make you stay. There are apologies that ask for absolution and apologies that simply make room for truth. Mine had to be the second kind. I understand, I said. We stood there crying in a kitchen that had held 30 years of our unfinished conversations. The next day I asked Paul if he had a few minutes. He looked almost alarmed, which told me I had probably treated him like background furniture for years. We sat on the back steps with coffee. I owe you thanks, I said. He shifted uncomfortably. You don't owe me anything. I do. He looked out at the yard. I just did what needed doing. I know, that's exactly why. He nodded once, then after a moment, I was angry at you too for a while. I smiled without humor. Seems I had that effect. He rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. It wasn't really about the military or your work. It was just Anna would be wrung out and your dad, he stopped, corrected himself. Daniel would be having a hard day and Lily wouldn't understand why Grandpa was calling her by the wrong name, and it felt like everyone in the house was carrying someone. I didn't know who was carrying you. That sentence hit me harder than any accusation. No one had been carrying me because I had built my life around not needing to be carried. That sounds admirable until you realize it can also be a way of refusing intimacy. I said, I appreciate you saying it. He glanced at me then. For what it's worth, he defended you. Every time, even when he was mad, even when he was confused. If anybody said anything that sounded like blame, he'd get stubborn as a mule. He'd say, my wife serves, that's who she is. I looked down at my coffee, steam rising, thin morning sun on the porch rail. That was part of the problem, I said. Paul didn't argue. A few days later, while sorting through the hall closet for clothes to take Daniel, I found an old canvas duffel at the back of the shelf. My name was stitched on a fading patch. Inside were things I had not touched in years. Old unit t-shirts, a rolled flag from a retirement ceremony, commendation folders, challenge coins in a velvet bag. The smell of dust and stored canvas rose up around me, and suddenly I was standing between two versions of myself so far apart they no longer seemed related. I sat on the floor and took things out one by one. There was a photograph from my final full year in uniform. I was standing with 3 other women in desert camo, all of us grinning into brutal light, arms around each other, faces lined by fatigue and certainty. I remembered that day. I remembered the heat. I remembered feeling useful in a way so pure it almost passed for peace. And then I thought of Anna at 13, maybe home with the flu, maybe winning something at school, maybe learning again that her mother's purpose lived partly elsewhere. I am not ashamed of my service. That is not this story. I did work that mattered. I helped people. I stood where I was asked to stand, and sometimes where I was. I am proud of much of it. But pride can coexist with regret. That was another truth age had finally made me humble enough to hold. That evening, I brought the duffel to Daniel's room. I showed him the old photograph. He looked at it a long time. "Soldier," he said. "Yes." He touched the edge of the picture. "Brave lady." I swallowed, sometimes. He turned his head toward me and squinted, as if the light on my face had shifted into some angle his memory recognized. "She kept leaving," he murmured. The air in the room changed. I leaned forward carefully. "Who did?" He looked past me, out the window. He frowned. "My girl, Then he closed his eyes, exhausted by whatever distance he had just tried to cross. I sat frozen in the chair. A few minutes later, he opened them again and said very clearly, "You look tired." I laughed because crying would have frightened him. "I am." He reached for my hand with surprising accuracy. "Then sit down." So I did. Not all revelations arrive like thunder. Some come as a soft, correct sentence from a man who no longer knew my name. Then came the true big reveal, though at the time it looked like nothing more than another envelope. Marisol found it in the bottom drawer of Daniel's bedside cabinet while helping me reorganize his things. Plain white envelope, no stamp, my name in his handwriting, shakier than the older letters but still distinctly his. She handed it to me and stepped out. Inside was one page, written on both sides, and a folded legal form clipped behind it. The form was an updated advance directive. The letter was harder. "Ruth, if you are reading this, I may be too far gone to tell you what I finally understood. I did not keep the truth from you only because I loved you. I also did it because I was afraid. There were years I watched duty take you from us and told myself it was noble to let you go. Most of the time I believed that. Some of the time I hid inside it because I didn't want to ask for more than you were willing to give. That is my part and I need to own it. I made a marriage around waiting. You made a life around answering calls. Both of us called it love." I sat with the page in my lap for a long time before I could keep reading. If I had told you when the forgetting began, maybe you would have stayed. Maybe you would have come home angry, guilty, half-willing, and spent the rest of my illness feeling trapped by my decline. I could not bear the thought of becoming the reason you finally stopped if stopping made you resent me. But here is the harder truth. I should have told you anyway. Not because you owed me your staying, because marriage owed us the choice. I am sorry I took that from you. Whatever happens now, don't spend the rest of your life making a shrine out of regret. It is too hungry. It will eat every room in the house if you let it. Love Anna, she paid a price for both of us. Come home in whatever way you still can. Downey, I did not realize I had been crying until a drop hit the page and blurred the last line. Marriage owed us the choice. That was it. That was the center of everything. Not only that I had left or that he had hidden his illness or that Anna had stepped into the space between us. It was that all 3 of us had spent years making decisions around one another instead of through one another, protecting, managing, enduring, translating, each calling it love, each in different ways, avoiding the frightening clean risk of direct truth. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I went into the bathroom down the hall, locked the door, sat on the closed toilet lid, and let grief move through me without trying to discipline it into something dignified. I cried for the man I loved, for the younger version of us who had mistaken endurance for understanding, for the daughter caught in the middle, for all the times I had believed that because our family survived my leaving, it must therefore have been fine. When the tears finally slowed, I looked in the mirror over the sink. My face was blotched, eyes swollen, white hair flattened on one side where I had pressed it into the wall. And I thought with a strange, quiet certainty, enough. Not enough grief, there would be no end to that. Enough evasion, enough performance. Enough standing outside my own life, narrating it like a report. That was the real power shift. I stopped trying to reclaim my old authority in the house, stopped acting like every altered room was an insult, stopped moving through my family as though I had returned to command. Instead, I asked Anna and Paul if they wanted to stay through the summer. They both stared at me. Lily's settled, I said. Daniel's facility is close, and this is her school district. Anna looked suspicious, as if waiting for the hidden condition. There isn't a trap, I said. I mean it. She sat down slowly. What about you? I looked around the kitchen, the school papers on the fridge, the child's cup by TH. E-Sync, the grocery list in Anna's handwriting, the basket of shoes by the door, evidence everywhere that home was not a museum. I think, I said, I'm done confusing ownership with belonging. Paul, who almost never spoke first in emotional conversations, let out a breath and said, That's generous. No, I said, it's late, that's different. A few nights after that, Lily found me on the porch after dark. She had her stuffed rabbit under one arm and that solemn nighttime face children get when they are unsure whether they are allowed to ask what they need. Grandma. I patted the chair beside me. She climbed up without hesitation. The porch light cast a soft cone over the steps. Moths bumped themselves senseless against the bulb. The yard smelled faintly of wet soil. Is Grandpa dying? She asked. Children always step around the language adults spend hours trying to engineer. Yes, I said. She nodded as if confirming something she already knew in her body. Mama has been crying in the laundry room. That nearly broke me. I know. She picked at one ear on the rabbit. Will he forget us all the way? I thought about lying, thought about making it gentler. Then I remembered all the other gentlenesses that had turned into distance. Maybe parts, I said, but not the feeling parts, I don't think. She considered that, like how I know my blanket is mine even if I'm sleepy. Exactly like that. She leaned against my arm, warm, small, trusting. Do you forget stuff? All the time. Like what? I smiled into the dark, where I put my glasses, why I walked into a room, whether I fed the dog. We don't have a dog. That one hurt and healed at the same time. No, I said, we don't. She was quiet for a minute. Then she looked up at me and asked, Did you used to live far away because you were helping people? Children are merciful in ways adults aren't. They give you one last simple door. Yes, I said. Did you miss your family? Every day. She thought that over, then threaded her small fingers through mine. You're here now. I looked out at the dark yard, at the old fence, the maple, the dim outline of the garage where Daniel had once kept nails sorted in jars by size because disorder offended him on a spiritual level. Yes, I said, I am. When the final decline came, it was quieter than I feared. There was no dramatic last speech, no gathered family in perfect cinematic light. Real endings are messier, softer, bodies reducing themselves by degrees, speech thinning, sleep expanding, time behaving strangely, long and short all at once. Daniel stopped eating much, then speaking much. His eyes opened less often, but when they did, I stayed close enough for him to find me without searching. Anna came every day. Paul brought Lily when it felt right and took her out for ice cream when it didn't. Marisol moved around us with that steady, sacred practicality the best nurses possess, treating death neither like a spectacle nor a failure. One afternoon, the room was full of June light, warm, pale, almost dusty. A fan hummed in the corner. Someone down the hall was playing old jazz too softly to identify. Daniel had been mostly asleep for 2 days. I sat beside him reading from one of his letters, my voice low, more for cadence than content. Don't come home because of fear, I read. Come home because it's time. His eyelids fluttered. I set the paper down and leaned closer. I'm here, Danny. His eyes opened. I have no need to exaggerate what happened next. The truth is more than enough. He looked at me, not through me, at me. The confusion was not gone, exactly. Illness does not reverse itself for the sake of emotional symmetry, but something aligned, a current completed. His whole face changed with recognition so quiet and deep it felt like dawn arriving in a room that had been dark too long. Ruth, he said. Just that. My name in his voice. I took his hand with both of mine. Yes. His eyes filled, mine too. You came back. The sentence was fragile, almost breath, but it was whole. I did. He gave the smallest nod, as if settling some old argument with the universe. Then, after a moment, he whispered, Long road. I laughed softly through tears, too long. His thumb moved once against my skin, a habit so familiar it hurt. He used to do that when we sat in church or at movies or in waiting rooms. Little absent-minded sweeps of his thumb over my hand, as if love needed constant low-level proof. I know you, he said, eyes closing again. Yes, I whispered, you do. He slept after that, woke once in the evening, once in the night, never fully again. He died the next afternoon with me on one side of the bed and Anna on the other. No thunder, no revelation, just a final soft exhale, and then the immense unnatural stillness that enters a room the instant a person is no longer in it. I had seen death before, too much of it. I knew the procedures. The calls, the forms, the pauses, the way professionals soften their movements around the newly bereaved. But this death did not pass through training, it entered through marriage. I rested my forehead on our joined hands and said nothing for a long time. Then, because he had once told me not to make a shrine out of regret, I did the hardest thing available to me. I thanked him, not out loud at first, just silently, for the life we had actually had, not the cleaner version I might have preferred to remember, for his patience, for his failures, for mine, for waiting, for not waiting, for keeping the porch light on as long as he could. The funeral was small, that was what he wanted. Church hymns, family, a handful of former colleagues from the school where he taught half the town's parents and probably most of their bad historical interpretations. A flag from my own years of service sat folded in the front pew, not because Daniel had served in the military, but because our marriage had, in its own way, served alongside me. I spoke briefly. I did not give the polished speech people expect from women who have spent their lives being composed in public. I said he was a good man. I said he loved history and tomatoes and properly sharpened pencils. I said he was funny in a dry, quiet way that rewarded attention. I said he built things that lasted. I said he believed people should return their shopping carts and tell the truth on small matters because the small matters train the soul for the big ones. Then I said this. He taught me that love is not only loyalty, it is presence. And when presence fails, love can still survive, but it leaves scars. I stand here grateful for him and changed by him and sorry in ways I can never fully repair. If any wisdom came from our life together, maybe it is this: tell the truth sooner. Go home when you can. And when someone you love is in the room, do not assume there will be a better time to really be there. There were people crying by then, Anna most of all. After the service, back at the house, relatives moved through casseroles and paper plates and stories. Daniel had once done this. Daniel had once said that. The air felt crowded with versions of him. Late in the afternoon, when most people had gone, Anna found me in the den where the letters had first undone me. She held out a small box. This was in Dad's dresser. I think he meant for you to have it. Inside was my wedding ring. Not the one on my finger, the original, the plain gold band I lost in 1992 and cried over for 2 days until Daniel replaced it with one that looked almost the same. We had assumed the first was gone forever. But there it was, wrapped in tissue. At the bottom of the box lay a note in his hand from years earlier. Found it in the garden, kept it because someday you might need proof that lost things can still return dirty and true. I sat down because my knees simply gave up. Anna knelt in front of me, and for the first time since I'd come home, she put her arms around me the way a daughter does when she stops being careful with her mother's feelings and just loves her outright. We held each other and cried without restraint. Grief changed the house after that, not by making it quieter, by making it more honest. We spoke Daniel's name without lowering our voices around it. We laughed sometimes, which startled us at first. We argued about practical things, the truck, the attorney, whether to repaint the guest room, and because the larger truths had already been dragged into light, the smaller disagreements no longer carried such poisonous voltage. I stayed. That sounds simple, it was not. Staying meant learning a life I had once treated like background. It meant being at Lily's Saturday swim lesson and knowing which towel was hers. It meant sitting across from Anna over bills and not disappearing when the numbers got ugly. It meant helping Paul fix the back 8 and realizing he had been part of the family for years while I still thought of him as Anna's husband in some unfinished way. It meant deciding which shirts of Daniel's to keep because they still smelled like him and which to donate because grief can turn every closet into a trap if you let it. It meant going through the garage with Anna one Sunday afternoon and finding jars of screws, seed packets from 5 years earlier, 2 broken rakes he had insisted were still fixable, and a coffee can full of little notes in his handwriting, hardware measurements, book titles, reminders to buy birdseed. Evidence of a mind once orderly, later struggling, always trying. One evening near the end of summer, I finally moved my things back into the bedroom. Lily had chosen the room downstairs by then because she liked being closer to the kitchen at breakfast. We carried her books and blankets down together. She supervised where the horses should go. Children treat transitions with a practicality adults might envy. When the room was empty again, I stood by the window in the deep gold light of late afternoon and let myself feel the full weight of returning. This was not the room I had left. It was not the marriage, not the family, not the self. But it was still my life. That distinction mattered. There are people who think resolution means getting back what you lost, only wiser. It doesn't. Real resolution is humbler. It is the moment you stop negotiating with reality and begin making a home inside it. A few months later, on the first cold evening of autumn, Anna and I sat on the porch with blankets over our knees. Lily was asleep. Paul was inside cleaning up dinner. The yard smelled like leaves and wood smoke from someone's chimney down the block. Anna said, "Do you ever wish you'd done everything differently?" I could have answered too quickly. Age teaches you caution around simple truths. Yes, I said, and no. She smiled faintly. That sounds like you. I looked out into the dark. If I say yes, I erase parts of myself that were real and good. If I say no, I lie about the cost. So I suppose the honest answer is this. I wish I had understood sooner that service does not excuse absence. I wish I had known that being needed out there does not cancel being needed. She tucked the blanket tighter around her legs. I used to think if I forgave you, it meant what hurt me didn't matter. I turned toward her. She kept her eyes on the yard. Now I think maybe forgiveness is just admitting that what hurt you mattered and loving anyway. I felt something in me unclench that had been tight for years. I love you anyway too, I said. She laughed through her nose. That's not exactly graceful. No, I said, but it's true. Then she leaned her head on my shoulder. The porch light glowed above us, the same warm bulb Daniel used to change every spring because he hated when it flickered. Moths had already started their nightly foolishness around it. I thought of his last clear words to me, you came back. Not just to the house, not just to his bedside, to the unfinished work of being known by the people who had paid the price for loving me. If you are asking whether everything healed, the answer is no. Some losses do not heal, they settle, they become part of the structure. You learn which weather makes them ache. You stop being surprised by the pain when it returns. I still wake some nights reaching toward the left side of the bed. I still hear a man in the grocery store laugh a certain way and turn too quickly. I still come across one of Daniel's notes in a coat pocket or a book and have to sit down for a minute. There are whole years with Anna I cannot replay without feeling the grain of what I missed. I suspect that will be true until my own memory starts laying its tools down. But here is what I know now, late at night, speaking into the hush of a house that has finally taught me how to listen. I left to serve my nation. I believed that meant something clean, noble, complete. And it did mean something. It shaped me. It gave me purpose. It put steel in my spine and steadiness in my hands. I do not spit on that life. I honor it. But I came back to a life I didn't recognize because while I was busy serving one form of duty, another one had been quietly asking for me in my own kitchen, at my own table, beside my own husband while he still knew my face. That is the painful truth. Here is the other one. Home did not reject me. It did what living things do. It adapted. It scarred. It kept going. It made room for grief and school lunches and legal papers and medicine cups and a granddaughter's stuffed rabbit and a daughter's anger and eventually my return. Not the return I imagined. A real one. Sometimes just before bed, I walk through the house and turn off lights one by one. I check the back door. I straighten the dish towel. I stand for a moment at the kitchen sink and look out over the dark yard. Then I leave the porch light on. Not because I am still waiting for Daniel to come home. Because now I understand what he meant. You keep a light on for the people you love, even when they are late, even when they are changed, even when you are. Maybe especially then.